Hi, my name's Jordan Marshall and I'm Special Projects Editor at Building Magazine. Thank you so much for joining us for this Digital Building Week session. It's another one that I'm really excited to be a part of. Today we're going to be looking to explore the rise of AR and VR in the built environment, and we've got a great panel for you today. We have Paul Connolly, Technical Director at Mace, Jonathan Monkley, Digital Services Lead for Property and Buildings at WSP, and Martha Tageri, Senior Partner, Head of Applied R&D at Foster & Partners. We've got a really great range of people here to speak to you today, so it should be a really good one. Just a few housekeeping matters for me before we kick things off. First of all, we would love for our audience to get involved today, so please send through any questions at any time and we'll try and cover off as many of those as we can in the Q&A portion of today's discussion. It's also worth flagging that, yes, this session will be available to catch up. I'm sure there'll be info that you want to go back and double check or share with a colleague via the same link that you've joined today. You'll be able to check it out again within about 30 minutes of the session wrapping up. So if you've missed something, you want to revisit it, never fear, it will be there for you to check out. That's probably it for me from a starting point. Each of our panelists is going to give a brief presentation now just to outline their overall views on the topic, and then we'll get into the group discussion. So first of all, we're going to hear from Martha.
Thank you very much. Let's make sure I'm sharing the right screen here. And yeah, so thank you for having me, first of all. My name is Martha Tageri. I'm the head of Applied R&D at Foster & Partners. I think the office has a reputation enough, so I won't kind of go into what we do. We are a global practice that's been working for 55 years. My team is a specialist team, a support group within the company, looking into a lot of different areas of expertise, one of which is actually experience and interaction. And through that, we have been looking quite a lot around augmented and virtual reality. And this is not something that we have been doing now, but we have been doing for quite a long time. This is a project we've done with UCL more than 25 years ago now, called Arthur, that effectively allows for real-time interaction with a virtual model through its headsets that at the time were military tech, and they cost 100K per person. But they allowed for this real-time interaction through the model in a completely different way. Obviously, having seen this technology so many years ago, the hardware was not there, but the ideas were. So as the hardware evolved, the ideas of how these kind of technologies can be used today has evolved with us as well. And we're using augmented and virtual reality not so much as a visualization tool, but as a design collaboration tool, and at a fraction of a price nowadays. So these are some interesting kind of past projects that we've done using similar things around AR and VR. You see a stereo projector on the left-hand side, you see Mexico City Airport, and you see our pavilion for Expo a few years back. And all of these things are interesting because they have a story behind them. So with the stereo projector, we actually managed to pass it through the inspector, who basically judges whether the ship can go and have a visibility through the port in order to do the right turns to go in port. And they would not actually give that that tick box before they actually saw it on the stereo projector, and we will put them on the position of the captain, and they realized that they had the visibility. With our pavilion, we were into a situation where we're trying to do some very interesting cost cuts for the walls, and we're trying to drop down the walls, and the client was really keen of cutting the cost of that kind of inner walkthrough by cutting the height of the walls, making sure that it's cheaper. And we put him within the experience. And so as we were in the experience, we actually dropped the height of the walls. And suddenly he changed his mind. He said, no, this is not good enough. We need to not do this. So they can be quite interesting tools that we're now using, not just to make design decisions, but to actually model within those tools. And as we model, to get real-time feedback in terms of analysis. So they have become a real true collaboration tool, where on one hand side, we put the customer within the experience. So here you see one of my colleagues actually going on top of a tower and checking what the view is from every single floor, something that we can give to the client, and being able to change that model in real time, or be able to do performance-driven design, collaborative, through this technology. We have in-house developed our own product called Glaucon. Glaucon allows for collaboration, iteration, and immersion in these spaces quite quickly. And it was initially inspired by this idea of what do you do when you're on site? You have to create quite a lot of physical mock-ups. They have a cost both in terms of money and carbon, and they take quite a long time to actually be developed. So what happens when you're actually can create tools that take you on site and allow you to be put in the experience in real time with the planners, the designers, the clients, and all the stakeholders, and be able to do this like that. So you see two very weird images. On one hand, we have an actual warehouse that we use to create a one-to-one mock-up for a digital experience for one of our buildings. On the right-hand side, we have some of planning specialists around Swiss Re looking into some models that we were doing at the time. A specialty that we work around this particular tool is all around being able to do very appropriate geolocation of whatever assets we have in real time. So we work a lot around things like that, but also it's all about the collaboration as well. It's about this idea of being able to walk on site with everybody else, be able to see what would be on site and understand how the space would change as you go about, and be able, as you do that, to change options and be able to compare the physical and the digital in real time with a quite interesting sort of expansion of reality. On top of that, we talk a lot about this being used not only for planning, for example, or for real buildings, but indeed in sense of how do we collaborate in the office. And as I mentioned, we wanted to reimagine the collaborative process, and that's why we have developed quite a lot of tools that allow people to model and analyze buildings through these tools in real time. But now through Glaucon, we also have the possibility of creating true virtual spaces in which different kind of designers, architects, engineers in different parts of the world can be part of a virtual design review, as we do them here, having assets like models, videos, images, all of them working in real time, being able to jump in and out of the spaces and these actual 3D models from wherever you are in the world, whatever you do. So I would say that for us, these tools have quite an interesting impact, and it can have an even bigger impact, both in terms of collaboration, but also in terms of experiencing the spaces. And they can do quite interesting things as well in other domains, like effectively quite a lot of research is being done around trying to understand how these tools can help impaired people, visually impaired people or otherwise, help us understand how they appreciate these spaces and help us better design for them. So I think that would be my short intro. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Martha. I just had a question come in off the back of your presentation that I might just ask you now while I have you quickly. It was just around that collaboration point specifically, and whether you're finding having these tools in place is like creating a smoother transition for clients, as in, are you able to deliver exactly what they're after more efficiently than perhaps before with like less design reviews and that sort of thing?
I think absolutely, because to be fair, it's not either or, right? What is powerful in this process is that we're offering all these things. So we can offer different types of media to our clients to be able to expose them to the design and what it entails. Nice things with augmented virtual reality is that you can very easily put them within that experience, help them change that experience, and help them understand what the repercussions of the design choices might be as they're sitting there. As I said, when we were in the expo pavilion, we just dropped the walls, and a discussion that was going for some time suddenly changed to, oh, we need to do this because it feels better as a space. So the client was instantly convinced just by being part of that experience. And I feel this is something that is very important, and the clients, I feel, really take up to it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That was a great starting point. So next we're going to hear from Jonathan. So we'll just hand over controls to you and move underway.
Just going to attempt to share my screen. I'm assuming you can see my screen now.
Yeah, it's perfect.
So I'm going to come at this from a slightly different angle than what you've just seen, but it probably complements it quite well. But first of all, my name's Jonathan Monkley. I head up digital services at WSP, and VR on augmented reality is very much a key part of what we deliver to our clients externally and our internal WSP clients. Recently, we've actually seen a slight decline in the use of virtual reality and an increased use or demand for what what you would call a 3D cave, which I'll come on to in a little bit. But the angle I'm coming at it from is the fact that construction emits 5 billion tons of CO2 per year, which is 12% of all human emissions. That number, I'm sure that's not going to be discussed, but it's very hard to get specifically that number. It's anywhere between 4 and 12 billion. 30% of rework on 30% of work on site is actually rework. This is from some recent white papers from a collection of tech firms exploring this. And augmented reality and recent advances in augmented reality have the potential to reduce that to probably near zero. So that's a really interesting potential use case that can be explored. It's something like for every pound spent on site, 7 is spent on rework on the back of these white papers. That's a really interesting business case for the use of this technology. And another interesting metric that comes out the back of that white paper, for every 4,000 tons of carbon saved is 1 life saved based on the fact of future climate mitigation through to heat stroke death, which is quite an interesting angle. So I'm coming at this from quite a macro perspective. I think this technology has huge potential to impact the construction site, and I don't think we've really quite scratched the surface of it yet. And particularly from an augmented reality perspective, I think it's only just reaching, or use of AR on site, it's just starting to reach a level of maturity where it's becoming very useful. But another interesting trend within our team and the work we're doing is how augmented reality links to the emerging metaverse trend, another digital buzzword. But it's very much sat within the, I'll get rid of that, sat within the AR can potentially open up a lot of business opportunities for clients. Recently worked with a client that was exploring the idea of building a university campus, a physical building, but linking that with a gaming engine version that was geospatially located that could be accessed via augmented reality. The business case put together was they could have 500 physical students and 5,000 virtual students. So there's a big, interesting macro business case there linked with augmented reality. But one of the real interesting trends is, particularly when you look at virtual reality, the barrier to entry is now really, really low. It's much cheaper, it's much easier. It's gone from being a gaming specialist's development system to something you can basically produce really high-end VR experiences through having a basic 3D model and tools like Twinmotion, where it's 1 click and you're in a really high fidelity environment. But since the pandemic, we've seen a push towards using 3D caves versus virtual reality. Since we're starting to get back into the office, we're trying to get people collaborating around 3D caves rather than virtuality, and the idea of collaborating again. So there's a slight drop in the use of it, and a slight drop in the use of the tech within our company towards immersive collaborative experiences, which is a very recent trend we've seen. And hopefully that opens up some good discussion points, because that is my introduction.
Brilliant, thank you so much. We've actually had a question come in there based off, I mean, I think you've sort of covered it off, but it would just be good to get your overarching point. At the very start, you said, you know, you've seen a fall in one and a rise in the other. The question coming in from our audience is it just the tech, is it just post-COVID sort of shift because that's driven that, or do you see other reasons for that?
No, so good example, we brought a client team in from overseas. They said, oh, we want a VR experience of our building. Great. There was about 12 of them in the room, and they basically spent the entire time shifting 3 headsets between them all, looking to discuss different areas of a building. The next time we used a 3D cave, and they could all stand in the 3D cave and discuss and collaborate together, which resulted in this lack of requirement to kind of shift this headset around, which was much more collaborative for them. Obviously, it's a very particular scenario, but we found it much more beneficial to the team to be able to stand together in the cave than shifting this awkward headset around. That being said, they can use VR when they're overseas, and like with what Martha presented, it unlocks a lot of collaborative aspects as well. but that's it's a different scenario. But that was very much a use case where they did not want to be in a headset and they wanted to be in a cave.
Sorry, just off the back of that explanation, we've had a couple of questions come in asking what is a 3D cave. So would you mind just explaining for those who didn't understand because of that, exactly what that is?
I can probably show a picture of one if you give me a second.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
It's probably easier to do that than, in fact, yeah, I shall show my screen and show a picture of one, if you will allow me to do it. Can I share my screen again?
I think you still are sharing, so that's
okay,
fine.
So there you go, yeah, so that's 3D cave. There's various types of them, but they're basically, this is called a mission room. Basically 3 big interactive touchscreens where you can basically stick anything on there you want. In that case, there's some synchro stuff on there, but didn't realize I was still sharing my screen. But yeah, there's the bit we had lunch, stood in the mission room, much more collaborative experience for the client team.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
There's various different types. There's ones where you can physically stand in and be sat in the middle of them, like Igloo or Fulcro. But that's basically mission room. So how do I stop sharing my screen? No one.
That's okay. Oh, but we can sort that out for you. Sorry, I'm just pulling it up. Yeah, there we go. Great. And now, just before we get into the full-on Q&A, we're going to hand over to Paul, who's going to give his introduction.
Yeah. How you doing? I'm Paul Connolly. I'm technical director here at Mace for Mace Construction. I've been here for over 16 years. I'm just going to go through, a bit about our business strategy around digital data. So we have a business strategy to redefine the boundaries of ambition is our purpose and priorities. And for over 30 years, Mace have shaped around a clear purpose. One of those purposes is ambitious plans for the next 5 years as a purpose-driven business around making sure that we have purpose and priority around digital and data, for which since 2017, our first innovation strategy we've adopted the use of digital tools. By adopting these transformative solutions, many of which are available to us today, we can revolutionize how we and where we build, operate facilities, external, internal, by the use of AR and VR. The focus on reducing carbon, as Jonathan said, is a key priority, and supported by the use of digital and data, the use of productivity via data, we can deliver better outcomes for our clients, be more consistent across our projects, and promote the key principles of collaboration, increase application of smart construction techniques, and effective use of digital and data. To achieve the goals in our 2026 business strategy, to redefine the boundaries of ambition, focused on the client, we move forward in speed in both testing and improving the value of the new products and technologies. One demonstration of where traction is accelerating in the marketplace is the increased investment in construction technology. And as Jonathan said, we've seen a bit of a mixture this last couple of years around the AR and VR space. So with increasing adoption of digital technologies to improve the overall life cycle, from conceptual design to construction, and using alternative reality technologies such as AR and VR, increasingly finding the use cases to improve accuracy, how we build the project, what does a project look like across the whole stream. So whilst alternative reality technology are gaining big traction in the gaming and entertainment industries, the relevance of construction is huge for us. Through merging the digital and physical views of job sites and simplifying communication, propelling construction companies to leverage AR and VR at an earlier stage to reduce errors, prevent rework, and create long-term investment. We've got a number of different things that we're working on. So we've been engaging in users in design process, similar to the guys previously, as early as possible. And that for us is having a clear digital and data strategy right from the outset of our engagement. And that sets off exactly what we will be doing throughout the process. And that is key to understand, what do we want to do on the project around all the digital tools. If we could use augmented reality to deliver more effective safety training, we are getting real traction around safety training, from inductions to working with people about how we build, how we incorporate programs, plans, from carbon as well. Off-site inspections, we've got real good traction using off-site inspections, using AR as well as obviously what's going on in the remote working. And visualizing the building, the model itself, the more mature the model comes through the conceptual part of design to the technical design, through the operational design as well. Having that AR, VR experience really is key about how we're building. Supporting facilities management, our handover process, and getting real traction around that field is very key. And visualizing real-time project delivery performance. Jonathan mentioned it around the cave. We've been operating control rooms, standard control rooms across our projects now from 2 large commercial offices in Paddington and Leadenhall, and that is improving real great traction for the use of client design teams and the supply chain as well. We've also got a number of digital AR and VR training plans through our business school to upskill our supply chain, which is key really, because they're a big part of the journey that we're on. So overall, since 2017, we've had some real traction around AR VR. In May of this year, we updated our innovation strategy to 3 priorities, one of which is carbon, second is construction production, doing more off-site, and the third is digital and data. So informed decisions, is key for us moving forward. So that just gives a brief outline of what we're trying to do as a business, macro for level, and using each individual tool across our projects.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Thank you to all our presenters for their great introductions, and I can't wait to dive into the Q&A. Just to address what we've been seeing a little bit in the Q&A already, yes, you'll be able to review these presentations and go back and revisit all the great info that's been shared already. It'll be available on demand. Just give us 30 minutes to process the video once the session's over, and it'll be there for you. So to kick things off, Paul, a question came in for you during that section, but if anybody else wants to jump in off the back of Paul's answer, please feel free, about the handover and FM capabilities and the use of AR in assisting with soft landings.
Yeah.
And whether that's something that Mace has been doing and how that's sort of been going.
Yeah, so obviously data around handover and commissioning, as well as linking in the carbon with the neighbours, has been very, very key for us. So using those sort of tools as an earlier stage from our technology to handover process has been key on a number of projects we've tried it on, whether that be a data center, whether that be in the aviation world. That handover process and using that sort of technology has been key for where people can click on, get whether use Oculus, go on and have a look at a fan coil unit or have a look at their data to understand, what the data is around that. We've used quite a lot of QR codes and getting into QR codes to open up what that data is in the form of the product. If that's input into the model, we can see it in a different world as well.
Absolutely. Did anybody else have any points to add to that? Nope, that's cool. Okay, the next one this one's from me. Sorry, audience, I'm going to jump in with one of my own quickly. But one of the ones that we were sort of discussing is, you've all sort of mentioned the implications from like a carbon perspective and how, there are potentially great benefits to the net zero and carbon agenda. There are obviously other big issues the industry is attempting to tackle at the moment, such as building safety and that sort of thing. Are there good uses for VR and AR on the building safety agenda, or the other big issues facing the sector at the moment?
From our point of view, the safety part is key. Carbon safety. From a safety point of view, if we could use these tools for inductions, can we use these tools to immerse or submerge people into how they're going to build, what the risks are around the building from an earlier stage? I think that will work really well. I think Jonathan's point around reworks is huge for us as an industry, not just here at Mace. That rework and getting that building done right first time mantra is key, and that right first time mantra, as Jonathan linked the carbon to it, is huge. If we could get to a place where we're virtually building, and everyone can look at what we're building at the earliest stage from a program safety carbon point of view and have that link, That's key really for us. So, I mean, I won't mention the skill shortage, but linking carbon and safety for us and understanding what you got to build, when you're going to build it, and what risks there are in a virtual world is good.
Well, time, cost, and carbon are quite intrinsically linked as concepts. And when you bring that into what you saw on the 3D curve was Synchro, which is a 4D programming tool. You can physically put the guy using the really complex piece of plant in his piece of equipment virtually and say, this is what we're proposing to do. A program level, does this work for you? Can you physically do it? Is it safe? Can you highlight any issues? I can produce, or my team can produce that simulation, but it's the specialist guy that's physically going to drive that plant knows whether that's the right way to do it or the most optimal way to do it. And when you start to play those pieces into it, there's a huge safety element there because we can produce those simulations, we can produce those experiences, but it needs the guys with the experience on the ground to say that's the right way. That makes sense. You physically can't do that. That's totally wrong. That's going to delay it 3 months on site. That's going to put this guy at risk. And using it for site inductions on the morning. This is what we're proposing to do today. Here's where the risk areas are. Don't go over that boundary. Here's where we're storing. It makes huge sense. So there's definitely a building safety issue. There's obviously a health and safety issue, element to it because it's much safer to virtually do it than it is to physically do it with actual people and get it wrong, obviously.
Absolutely. Martha, I feel like you were about to say something as well before. So did you have anything that you wanted to add there?
I think that carbon and security are two different issues, and security and safety on site is a very important thing. I would say that the hardware is not particularly there yet to do some of the things that we're all preaching. We could definitely do a lot of these things, and we should. But the sort of how that hardware works, like if you try any augmented reality headset, what is the button weight that it needs, what is the field of view, all these things do not necessarily work right now properly to put it with somebody on site on a difficult situation. And that's why there are companies particularly looking at this thing and particularly looking at the hardware in this stage, doing something like that. Simulations obviously can be very useful. We have done them in different occasions. It's usually a VR simulation that allows people to go through a virtual mock-up and understand distances, appreciate things that happen. It will never exactly replicate what happens on site. It's like a flight simulator pretty much, right? So it can train you up to a point, but then I can see a future not very far away from now where you actually wear glasses, simple glasses that overlay the sort of data that you need, that overlay the sort of boundary conditions that you need to take care of, that can pick up danger and can alert you to that, but we're not there yet.
Absolutely. Okay, man, the questions are flying in from our audience, so I'll try and cover a few of theirs before I get back onto my list. So this one has, again, I think you guys have touched on it, but it'd be just good to get some expansion. Have you applied the use of AR, VR for training your staff or for long distance training? And how does that work? I know, Martha, I think you definitely touched on that. So if you want to answer in the first instance, and then if anybody else wanted to jump in, that would be great.
I think it defined training in that sense. I think we have been using it for design collaboration, and that's like a huge piece of training in an architect's life, being able to be there in a meeting with people who have the experience and they can mutually have the conversation over things. It has certainly been something that we have done prior to COVID and has blossomed during COVID because it allows us to have that real-time interaction with people who are sitting in different places of the world. There are a lot of challenges around that in terms of interaction, in terms of multi-user interaction particularly, and in terms of like how you guide the user through the interface to be able to see the things that you're seeing, discuss around the things that you're interested, etc. So we have definitely done it. There are a lot of very, very interesting challenges around interface and user interaction that can be kind of research pieces on their own right. But is an excellent opportunity to also think of these things above and beyond our industry, right? You can think about AR classes and universities. I think somebody touched upon that in the future, where people in different parts of the world can be part of a virtual class, or people who have some movability issues and cannot travel that well be able to be put into places that they wouldn't otherwise be able to be put. So a lot of interesting things can happen around that domain.
One of my first ever experiences of gaming engines, and it wasn't necessarily that it was gaming engines, was from a development firm that were doing stuff for submarine training, and basically they simulated what individual people needed to do in certain emergency situations. And what was really interesting, that basically the person doing the training would be dead in that scenario. So it was like the room you're in is on fire, the submarine is going down, you have to pull these levers and tell people, and then probably pass or probably die. It was a really interesting. There's a lot and you can't physically simulate stuff like that in the real world. But the kit is developing so fast that you can probably put your mind to whatever you want to train someone on. If you've got the one, particularly in complex environments, in industrial environments, you can. Another example, process plants where you've got very complex lines of machinery where process managers design things quite often traditionally in 2D. You can give them the opportunity to walk down what they've designed and see whether it's optimal for the user experience when they're going to be in the real world, in kind of complex environments. And the data centers is another really interesting space because they're extremely technical, extremely complex. Another good example was as working on a project where it was in the nuclear sector, and the guys were developing basically a facility to go around a reactor, and they couldn't really understand the complexity of the design. So we used VR to stand them on top of the nuclear reactor, which you could obviously not physically do in the real world, but then they stood there and they understand it, the interfaces between the steel and the M&E and all the plant around it, whereas you couldn't physically do that on site because obviously you'd be in trouble. But you could test and you could understand that in the virtual environment without any risk to the individual. Slight tangent, I apologise, but
no, it was interesting.
Slightly relevant.
I think for me, as Martha said, the training is such a wide spectrum. You know, I think we could all recognise that we need more practitioners in BIM digital data. So can we get to a space where we're using, you know, technology to support our training? I think definitely there's definitely a lot of that space. So for me, I think the benefit of being collaborative is the key thing at the moment. Yeah, so having pockets of the collaboration is amazing, but getting more practitioners around all the tools is really the key.
Brilliant. Okay, we've had quite a few versions of this question come in, so I'll put it to you guys now. How widespread is the use of AR and VR in construction, the built environment at the moment, and what will it take to make it more widespread? Is cost the issue, or are there other barriers, and how can they be overcome? I've sort of amalgamated a few people's there, so sorry to everyone if I've butchered your question, but we've had it come in a few times, so try and cover off as much of it as possible.
I think for me, pick up on Jonathan's point, I think there's the peaks and troughs of it. I think there are a lot of great work out there. You know, XYZ. There's a lot of different HoloLens. There's lots and lots of different things. But for me, the starting point must be having a clear strategy at the front. Funding will always be an issue, and making sure there's the money from it. So getting the client buy-in, getting everyone's buy-in from the start, and having that clear strategy. So without naming lots of different people, you know, that do certain AR, VR things, I think there's a big use out there. I probably think we don't probably advertise it enough as a construction industry, all the good stuff we're doing. But I do think, you know, one of the big barriers is, we already spoke about upskilling people. The second one is making sure there's a clear strategy from the start to be collaborative. And because people always want the value. What's the value of doing it? There's a lot of value that we've all spoke about, from carbon, reworks, making sure you design one, giving client options, and have a look at the virtual or the AR options is good.
It's a big skill. If you look across, if you walked around WSP's offices, you probably wouldn't see much VR happening on a daily basis. But if you spoke to people, they'd be like, oh, we did it on this project, we did it on this project. It's not kind of a daily occurrence. I would make the assumption, going back to my architect's training, I would assume the next generation of architects given the fact that a lot of they've grown up using VR as a gaming system, it's part of their daily life. They use it just as people. It'll become much more business as usual for them because they're used to it and they understand it and they're not intimidated by it, and they will just stick a headset on and go with it. I know from personal experience, sitting in what you're working on virtually makes a lot of sense from a design perspective. So I would assume that there's going to be a generational shift in 10 to 15 years time where it's just everyone. It's much more business as usual. People will demand it as part of normal workflows on projects, because the barrier to entry on computers is dropping. The barrier to entry on technology is dropped. It's much easier. When I first started doing VR development, it was really, really hard. It took days and weeks. Now there's tools within all of the generic BIM authoring kit where it's like one click to a good VR output if you want it. Integration of things like Twinmotion into Unreal 5 and Revit, that's a big step forward for like high fidelity VR experiences for designers, not just architects, but structural MEP, anyone who's using the Autodesk packages. The barriers to entries are massively dropping, and the generational shift is starting to come in, I think.
Absolutely. Martha, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I have a slightly different take on this. I think certainly the hardware is better, but it's not where it should be. I think it's much easier when we're talking about AR. We have actually quite a lot of projects in the office that we're using both augmented and virtual reality as design tools and as review tools. A lot of that are based on AR applications on an iPad, because that's something that people have by default. You know, they're using it as a daily tool. I think when you start discussing and making a plan, as we have, around XR as a service through an office, let's say as big as Foster & Partners, the amounts that come up in terms of acquiring all the hardware and building up all the infrastructure to allow for such a system are non-trivial still. That doesn't mean that they're prohibitive, but it means that somebody needs to make a plan, and they need to kind of create a budget around it. They need to train their people around it, and most importantly, they need to have people to be able to deliver that content. I do agree that there are one-click options out there that can create really fantastic visualizations, but that's pretty much it. It's a visualization. It's effectively a click from a model to a VR experience of that same model, and there's not much more happening there. So if you want to really use this as a design tool, if you want to really create a sort of interface where the users can actually make decisions through that are not only relying on what they see, but are relying on an experience that is ever changing, you do need developers to actually work around these applications. And these developers do not come cheap, and they're not easy to find. They can be gaming developers, but gaming developers have a very particular view of life. They're not necessarily kind of focused in the AAC. So finding a good gaming developer or XR developer that is effectively has an interest in the built environment as well is a non-trivial task. So I would say that we have been doing it for 25 years. In the past 10 years, it certainly has exploded, but not to the extent that things like BIM have exploded, for example. I would say that hardware is key. I would say that taking into consideration the infrastructure that you need to build in your office to allow for that is key, and also talent is key. So all these things need to exist in conjunction to each other to make this possible en masse in the future.
Absolutely. Something that you've all sort of touched on in brief is the need to have people who are across these sorts of skill sets, and some of that is happening inherently as the next generation comes in, but some of it isn't. Is there more competition for skills if you are competing to get people in who can design this sort of thing, if they could be working for tech startups versus traditional construction businesses? Is it like fighting over a different talent pool with a different set of firms?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you look at the traditional core skills from architectural engineering, that if you look at the core skills of the construction industry, I do think there are some new skills. And I think, as Martha said, in my world, this last 5 years, we've probably seen more uptake around 360 photography linking into a BIM model. We've seen so much push on towards the BIM collaboration tools. That technology around AR and VR can definitely start to accelerate, but predicated by having that, that backbone to support it. The fact of the matter is there is definitely a different skill set. We've already mentioned the gaming industry, but the attraction to construction's got to be around, these innovative processes, technology, using the right language from digital data, BIM, whatever they are. We've got to be able to attract different people to the industry, and Martha made a very good point. The people that want to actually invest in a new technology has got to want to do it, because there's got to be output there. There's definitely a need, and there's definitely a want from a design, engineering, collaborative point of view. So it is definitely a different skill set from me. Yeah. So with all of that, sorry, Jonathan. Just with all of that does come, you must still know how to put a job together. The skill set must come with the skills, knowledge, experience as well to understand how to design, construct, and build it.
I also think construction's got a bit of a brand issue sometimes as well, because it is a tech industry. When there's quite often this discussion of why should people come into construction versus tech, but construction is a tech industry. When you start to break it apart into what everyone's doing on a daily basis, it is a tech industry. It's a tech. There's tech industries within tech industries. You've got AR development, you've got VR development, you've got people looking at Python code and drone technology, 360 photography, Boston Dynamic robots, the off-site manufacture, building gaming configurators for platform approach of houses. We are a tech industry when you peel the onion away. But another valid point from Paul, we still need to be able to design something and put a project together and understand how it's going to work. And that's the difficult thing. And I think Martha touched upon, we need developers that have got like really high-end gaming development skills, but it's the appeal of coming from the construction industry, from the film industry, quite often is a tough challenge. But construction is a tech industry. When you peel the onions away from it.
I want to believe that construction is a tech industry, but I mean, look, I'm leading an applied R&D group, right? So I'm definitely into tech. I'm definitely into innovation. I think these are integral parts of our industry if it is to be moved forward. The reality is that we're also a very traditional industry, and that has to do with the fact that we're not vertically integrated. We're a huge machine with a lot of clogs and pieces that make it work together, and all of them have a different rhythm. Some of them are much faster than others, and that means that you cannot vertically innovate in the industry as easily. That becomes an issue, because that as an issue means that you might actually be very fast pacing in one part of the design process and actually very slow pacing in another, and therefore that kind of shifting gears creates problems when innovation needs to very quickly be identified, worked out, and deployed through the pipeline of any job. We want to believe that we are like the movie or games industry. We're actually not. The movies industry, for example, have a very discrete pipeline with particular players that deal with particular assets that has been optimized for ages. A lot of the things that we're talking around AR and VR have actually came from the movie industry, where real time was God, and that was what everybody was looking into when it came to visualization, renderings, whatever. So we're actually now taking all that knowledge from these industries to try to do real-time simulations, like piggybacking on assets that they created for them to be able to do renderings in real time. The gaming industry came from this idea of being able to be in a scene and be able to change things in real time in a realistic way. And therefore, I feel one thing that we need to do potentially is be a bit more open. We are very precious about our titles, and we are very precious about the fact that we are a creative industry, and I'm fully supporting that. But I think we also need to be a little bit like Schrodinger's cat, like alive and dead, an engineer and a developer and a creator and an architect all together within that box, and be able to combine these different things together in order to attract that type of talent that we want to push these things, and be able to take all the excellent things that are happening in different industries and try to integrate them in our own process. And that's not a very straightforward thing to do. I think that all the people in this call are particularly talented people who have been doing that for their offices, and it's an exciting panel to be at. So they understand exactly the difficulties I'm talking about.
Absolutely. And we still have questions flying in for our very talented panel. So I'm going to try and get a few more in the next 15, if that's okay. We've had a couple come in about how this discussion can dovetail with other technologies, so like digital twins and that sort of thing. Is there significant crossover? Are there ways to use AR and VR to interact with digital twins? And is this something that we should be looking at as a sector more?
Absolutely. I will jump in here because we have a very, we have our teeth in the game of digital twin. We have been doing quite a lot of things around it. Actually, my colleague Adam Davis, who's sitting right next to me, is leading that thing within our group and for the office. And there are a lot of very interesting things that you can do with these technologies when it comes to the digital twin world. You need to have some sort of understanding, of course, of what it is that you're trying to apply. If it's a digital twin of the type that the Siemens and the Bosches of this world apply, that have to do with saving energy and creating certain conditions for your facilities management to make sure your building runs better. It's not necessarily that integrated, but when it comes to effectively a digital twin that can facilitate people understanding how their buildings work in relation to their occupants and how different things can happen throughout the day that can change the way we experience the space in regards to the things that we want, then we have been investigating quite a lot the use of AR and VR within that domain.
Absolutely. Did anyone want to jump in? Oh, Jonathan, go again. Your sound's dropped out. Oh, you're just muted. Can you unmute yourself? No, I don't know what's happened there. You were working fine just before.
Hello?
Yeah,
Yes.
you're there.
Yes.
Hello, sorry. I broke his microphone. So the digital twin piece, I think Martha jumped on absolutely. There's a lot of doing lots of thinking in that space and work in that space on what the business opportunity is potentially for developers. From an energy saving perspective, dead easy business case. If you optimize your asset, you can save energy, therefore reduce your operating costs, increase your net return on net operating income. But there's also kind of a user experience piece there. I mentioned it earlier, the university campus opportunity where you can integrate the physical and the virtual space together and have 10x the opportunity you have for your asset. There's also user experience. You can change spaces into something different as well. You can create a different experience for a particular environment with augmented reality overlays with your phone or smart glasses that Martha brought up. There's also the concept of the idea of integrating digital twins. I know there's a lot of discussions around the complexities of the National Digital Twin Programme, but there's some really clever thinking in cyber physical infrastructure that has huge opportunities for us if we can grasp it. Now, usually as a species, we tend to wait till it's too late to provide ourselves with the tools to do this. But when you bring in the issues we have on a macro perspective from energy scarcity and climate, we should be really trying to get to grips with this stuff now. I don't think anyone's really got the answer yet, but it's stuff we should be really trying to explore, I think.
Absolutely. I've also had quite a few questions coming on about the applicability across sectors. So we've obviously touched on the education space, we've spoken about in commercial use. We've had some questions around applicability for civil engineering, big infra, whether you've seen good examples of application, how that might work, and also with volume house building, which I know might not be anyone on this call specific area that they're looking at. But yeah, do you feel there's sort of universal applicability, or are there certain asset types that it works best for?
Well, for us, I think it works across the whole portfolio. I think, when you look at the AR space with XYZ and going out with a set of glasses in your helmet and looking at the civil infrastructure and ensure it's installed right, those sort of things are key. So I do think absolutely that there's a space for it all. I think if I could just come back to the previous point around digital twin, there's a space for everything. I do think that as an industry, you could probably be working on 30 or 40 digital tools, across the whole portfolio, from carbon calculators to AR, VR to the BIM world. I think it's just making sure right at the start you have a clear strategy per project, and that then leads itself onto the sectors. I do think all of this is applicable in every single sector, from healthcare to data centers to aviation, all the way through civil infrastructure. Jonathan's mentioned, being at the top of a nuclear plant. I think all that sort of stuff, we've done that where we're at the top of cranes, and now have a look at lifting plans. When we're looking at construction and production, building off site, how do you bring it to site with the logistics strategy, and bringing a module that's 30 foot in, onto a project. So I do think there's space for all of it.
So big infra, big use cases for it, in my opinion, particularly on like long linear assets, where during lockdown, I actually spent a lot of time in VR visiting sites in America and Germany, where I was basically on site looking at, but it was a daily drone scan, and you could kind of visit site virtually in the daily drone scan. You just loaded it up to a gaming engine. You could kind of, it was a pandemic type thing, but also there was a heck of a lot of argument for risk reduction because less people needed to be there, less travel required. So there's the particularly big long linear assets and infrastructure assets. There's a huge argument for the use of the tech, it done right. I think one of the mistakes our industry makes a lot with technology, and has done since, say, the BIM mandate, it tends to throw technology at problems without really understanding what it's trying to solve. And I think Paul and Martha have mentioned it. It's like, well, you have to get your strategy right. So define the problems you're trying to resolve. If you've got an infrastructure project that you're 500 miles from, use case to use the tech to visit site or analyze things virtually rather than physically. There's some real cool tech available that's dead easy to use, but just define your problem statement and pick that apart, and then build your tech stack back from that. Yeah.
Brilliant. Excellent. Okay. On a similar vein to that, it's sort of circling back to part of that net zero agenda and the applicability for retrofit and refurbishment as opposed to new build. Are there major barriers to using AR/VR in retrofit, given that we're going to have to be retrofitting our buildings on a mass scale to hit any sort of net zero targets? Are these technologies that could assist with that, or are there issues with using them in existing spaces? Is a lot of intrusive and expensive work required in the existing building to get the information you need for it to be effective?
I mean, why would you want? Why wouldn't you want to use it there? What would be the problem? You have something that exists, and you have.
We've had questions coming. We've had a few questions on the retrofit piece. I've tried to mash them together there, and probably done a particularly effective job. But we've had questions about service location surveys and that sort of thing, and how do you need to do those really deeply before it's effective? Do you need to make significant interventions?
I think if you think of augmented virtual reality as something where you can superimpose a virtual reality on top of an actual reality and see how these things work, right? It makes it the perfect tool for retrofit, because you can go on site and you can directly sit on the existing site as you kind of superimpose the one to the other. If you have perfect kind of superimposition based on how your geolocation works, you can see exactly what happens. You can see exactly what that new space is going to be on top of the existing space. So it makes a lot of sense. I think there are a lot of questions around, and I'm sorry, Jonathan, I'll let you kind of talk in a minute. There are a lot of questions around, should we use it for this? Should we use it for that? Should we use it for the other? I think like you will need to try these things. There's no hard stop that says, oh, if you use it there, the world is going to explode and everybody's going to die. It's like, try it, use it, see if it does exactly what Jonathan said before. See what it does, if it does good for you, and if it makes sense. A lot of people want to use technology for the sake of using technology. I would say use technology when you see it makes a difference in how you do things better. And for most of the things that you suggested, absolutely, AR and VR can have some really interesting uses. They're not great for everything, but they're really good for certain things.
I think, sorry, Jonathan, I think so. What we've done on a couple of jobs, case studies, we've used the Boston Dynamics dog on a couple of jobs where we've had a lack of information to scan, create our model around scanning. So create some models and then take take it into the AR world. So that connected data using technology. So whether we've used it on a cargo tunnel, using that laser scanning and that approach to get the information to then look at the different things that you could do with the client. Obviously, the retrofit and the carbon agenda is great, but understanding what a client can do with a project, whether it's taking out an atrium and building an atrium in a different location, or is still giving that client options. I think, as Martha said, I think the use of that and giving the client options is very good for a client in a retrofit world.
I think the question was probably, my take on that question is it's orientated at an issue we deal with anywhere. Like, existing records generally aren't great. No. That's no different if you are working on a project from the 60s and you get a set of drawings in 2D that are wrong. You've still got that problem, even if you've got a virtual reality model of it. There's one of the barriers to entry for most projects when it's retrofit is that the cost of the laser scan to create that 3D geometry. That's always one of the barriers on projects. But there's, as Martha said, it makes sense if you get there with it. It varies between assets, the complexity of it. If you're working on something like the parliamentary estate or the royal estate, like creating that as existing model is very, very hard, painful task. But once you've got it, and it's there for generations. And there's a huge de-risking issue there as well, because existing records are generally wrong. So it might cost 20, 30 grand to do the laser scan in the model, but then the project's de-risked throughout the delivery, and a 6-week delay because a piece of steel was in the wrong place doesn't matter if you've dropped 30 grand at the front of it. It's irrelevant.
Absolutely. I'm very conscious that we've rapidly run out of time. We've covered a lot of ground. So I was going to ask each of you if you could sort of give your big takeaway or two, if you've got 1 or 2 key points you want the audience to leave today with, just to sort of make sure that everyone's on the big points as we wrap up. I don't want to pick on anybody, so does anybody want to go first particularly?
Yeah, so from my points, the AR, VR is a great conversation, but it will always come around making sure there's a strategy from the outset. There's true value in these tools. It's using them throughout collaborative workshops. So for me, the take is always get the strategy from the start, operate the strategy, link technology together, and get in a space where we're upskilling from a safety program, productivity, carbon point of view. There's so many different benefits to it.
I think the software around AR and VR has been in a very good place for quite some time. The hardware is still kind of rapidly evolving. I think we'll find ourselves very quickly in a situation where the use of VR, and particularly AR, can be intrinsic in the way we experience space around us. You can find yourself in a situation where you wear a lens or glasses that effectively customize the space around you as you walk, because they ping from your watch or your phone the data back to a system that pings back data for you that effectively helps you understand how to appreciate and experience the world around you. So this is going to come. And therefore, this is a significant technology that we need now to understand how can be integrated within the AC industry and how it can make us do things better, faster, and more productively.
Brilliant, thank you. And Jonathan?
I think my closing piece is define your problem statement before throwing technology at it. Tech does loads of stuff, but if you just throw it at something, it tends to not do what you want. So be very specific about the problem, the strategic micro or macro problem from a project perspective that you're trying to solve before picking your technology stack.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I want to say a huge thank you to all 3 of you for being so forthcoming with your expertise. It's been really appreciated. We've had great feedback from the audience already, so thank you so much, really appreciate it. Would also love to say thank you to the audience for being so engaged, and apologise to everyone whose questions I didn't get to, because there's still plenty more sitting in our queue, which I think shows the level of interest in what everyone had to say. If I could just make one quick request of our audience as we close out today, a survey that will take you 15 seconds to fill in. They're all multiple choice, pops up, and it will just let us know if this is the sort of topic you want to hear more on, what topics you want us to cover, so we can keep putting on great events with great speakers to cover off the issues that are most important to you. Finally, we have more Digital Building Week sessions tomorrow. Everything that's already happened this week is available on demand. So please make sure you check them all out. So a huge thank you to our speakers again, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.